or actually it's good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us at Volunteer Arlington's Time to Serve. We're excited about all of you coming to be with us here today and appreciate you taking the literal time to come and listen and learn about how to incorporate civic engagement into your organization's game plan. My name is Lisa Fikes, and I serve as the president and CEO of Leadership Center for Excellence. And we have a wonderful partnership with Arlington County, a public-private partnership where we run Volunteer Arlington. And within Volunteer Arlington, we seek to connect individuals, groups, and businesses with volunteer opportunities. On our Volunteer Arlington website, we have over 350 local nonprofit and county organizations that are seeking volunteers. And we try to make that happen through our website, volunteerarlington.org, where they're able to share their mission and share their opportunities on our site. We also have various events throughout the year where you have a chance to informally connect in person. So it's not just transactional on a website, but you're actually able to connect with real people in real time who are doing the wonderful work in Arlington and need your support. This is one of those events. We also host our MLK Day of Service annually, a regular series called Causes and Cocktails. There's one coming up, and we invite you to take a look at that. And Arlington Cares each summer, where we celebrate volunteerism as well. You know, we like to say when we're connecting businesses with volunteer opportunities that it's good business to care. And just as there are many opportunities to be able to be civically engaged, whether it's listening and learning or voting or using your voice or actually volunteering, there are many ways that businesses can serve as well. So we've got 3 highlights that we hope to hold up today for you to be able to engage in, listen from, and learn from, and for this to be a casual conversation in such a way that you can engage with one another and with our speakers for the day. We're very excited to be in just a moment hearing from Serve Virginia. That'll be one of our highlights, where you'll have a chance to hear the most recent research that they've done around civic engagement across the Commonwealth. Then a second highlight will be hearing from some amazing companies and organizations here in the area who are incorporating civic engagement into their game plan for their organizations. And lastly, you'll have a chance to connect with some of our Volunteer Arlington partners who are in the room today. This is meant to be an informal time where you have a chance to really get to know who the faces are, who's doing the work, and how you might be able to launch from there to engage your organization and your employees with service. So those are our hopes for the day, and we're excited for you to be on the journey with us. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm now super excited to be able to introduce Annalise Gamble, who is with Serve Virginia. Annalise is the statewide engagement officer, and we really appreciate her joining us. Kathy Spangler was originally on our agenda for today, and unfortunately she's had a family crisis and is not able to join us. So our thoughts and prayers are with her. We really appreciate, Annalise, you stepping in. I know you're knee deep in the work all the time with Kathy, and appreciate you being able to share your expertise and all the things that you all have learned through this project. So thanks for joining us today, and thanks for sharing this great work.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lisa, for the warm welcome. Hi, everybody. I'm excited to be here with you all today. Like she said, my name is Annalise Gamble, and I'm the Statewide Engagement Officer at Serve Virginia, which is a intentional partnership between the Virginia Department of Social Services and the Virginia Service Foundation that seeks to kind of enact the work of a state service commission. So all that to say, we do a lot of work around AmeriCorps, civic engagement, volunteerism, really seeking to help cultivate and support a commonwealth where every Virginian has the opportunity and can make it possible to volunteer and get engaged in their community. So today I'm here to talk about kind of building a culture of service, volunteerism, and civic action. We come to this work, like Lisa mentioned, from a recent project that we completed with folks from across the state called the Virginia Community Engagement Index. And so I'm excited to be here today to share with you a little bit more about what we learned and what we're still learning as a part of that project. So Serve Virginia really believes in the impact of volunteerism and service. We seek to inspire and celebrate volunteering, both with individual volunteers and with organizations that work with volunteers. And so we really believe in the benefits, right? For everything from how volunteerism and service can benefit individuals and families directly through improved mental health and improved physical health and reducing isolation and loneliness, but all the way through to how that creates impact in our communities. We really believe that the way that we invest our time, talent, and treasure as Virginians makes a difference. And that we see this rippling impact of service, both in the ways that it meets community needs and addresses community priorities, but then also that it creates really sustainable solutions that we can keep going and create this greater impact than we could do on our own. Oops. So our work is kind of broadly guided by these three interrelated strategies. When we think about supporting an infrastructure, right, thinking about the civic ecosystem, there's a lot to do. And so we kind of break it down into sort of some of these three buckets, thinking about how we can help cultivate and support a civic framework or civic fabric of the state. This is not to say that we have any delusions of grandeur here, that Serve Virginia comes in and does this work, but that we are eager to partner alongside organizations like Volunteer Arlington and nonprofits and companies and just everybody that plays a part in this service and volunteerism ecosystem, that we can help lift up some of our common priorities, concerns, initiatives to help make a greater impact. So one of the things that we heard when we were, asking our community what it looks like to build capacity and cultivate stronger infrastructure was that there was a need for a more representative, integrated, and aligned network of partners. And so we asked that network of partners a little bit more about what that meant to them. What resources did they feel like they needed to really strengthen the opportunities for Virginians to get involved and to volunteer? We heard loud and clear. There are a lot of barriers and challenges that face both nonprofits specifically, but then also just organizations that either provide volunteers, connect volunteers to service opportunities, or offer those service opportunities for folks to engage. We heard that there was a lot of really strong community needs, right? That folks were seeing priorities across their community that needed tangible solutions, but that there wasn't always a great case statement, right? There wasn't a lot of information to point to say, this is why volunteerism is the answer. And so we heard that and really took a look at what we could do kind of from the state perspective to help support more folks being able to point to service as a solution. We really wanted to address that need for community level information, right? Of how are we connecting these buckets of community needs and priorities with what folks are doing and what folks care about, and really trying to come up with some so what's, right? Some action steps out of this to help prepare all of us that want to make a difference and want to leverage our resources and our assets to kind of help create a stronger infrastructure overall. So we kind of took a step back and thought, what already exists and how do we help craft something that's going to extend the conversation, right? Not recreate the wheel, but really look at something that is going to make that next step a little bit easier. There are some great national projects and frameworks that exist and are available. The National Conference on Citizenship for One does a great job of looking at census level data and seeing how that connects to civic engagement. We were looking at that. The last one for Virginia was done in 2010. So obviously a lot has changed. And we were thinking about, ways to help include that into this work, but really saw a strong need and desire for something that was more Virginia specific, something that more holistically encompassed what we're seeing in the volunteerism conversation, what we're seeing from engaged Virginians, more specifically than what we were able to kind of glean from census level data. So we rallied the troops, right? We gathered partners from across many sectors. 38 different partners kind of came from across the state, leaders in lots of different kind of topical areas. And then we brought together national experts that knew civic engagement, knew how to measure civic engagement. We brought this whole group together and started asking, what does it look like to create a Virginia-specific tool that helps us get to know better what's happening, right? The state of engagement, what folks care about, and what they're doing. And how do we bring all this together to know how we can kind of craft that invitation for more folks to join? We fielded the survey this time last year, so it's only been about 11 months that we've actually had the report, but our goal was about 3,000. We thought if we can hear from 3,000 Virginians, that'll at least get us, a taste of what's happening. We were amazed and really honored that we heard from over 6,300 Virginians, right? So specifically, we know from how we fielded the survey that these are engaged Virginians. So you'll hear me say that a little bit this morning. When we say engaged Virginians, we're thinking those folks that are either likely to volunteer or already involved, or maybe are on the perimeter, right, of, being aware of nonprofits, but not necessarily being plugged in quite yet. We were really excited to hear from this group because we know that these are the folks that are kind of our target audience, right? We're not necessarily just looking kind of purely statewide. We were able to weight our survey to be demographically representative, which was really exciting for the data nerds in the room. That's it was a great feat to be able to compare some of our findings kind of across the Commonwealth. But we were really excited about the idea of getting deeper into what volunteers think and what they care about and how to kind of grow that population a little bit further. And within that survey, we really had to take a look at, saying we wanted a Virginia specific tool is great, and saying we wanted something that's going to help kind of answer these big questions was nice, but we really had to kind of put some details to that, right? Figure out what our formalized goals as a core team were going to be, so that we could really take a look at how the survey was going to continue the conversation. Something as an aside that I found really interesting in this process was that we brought together, 45 different folks from around the Commonwealth, around the nation, to really talk about this. And we found a lot of ways that folks are already looking at data, right? Already looking at information that's telling them about the measured need, that are looking at community health needs assessments, different things like that. And so really seeing this as an opportunity to really build the body of knowledge, right? Continue the conversation further. We really wanted the Virginia Community Engagement Index is what we ended up naming it, but at the time, this unnamed project, to establish some benchmarks, kind of beyond the sort of general assumptions of, it's estimated that 1.8 million Virginians volunteer every year. We know that from existing data, but we really wanted to get a sense of what does that mean? What does that look like when 1.8 million Virginians are mobilized in their communities? We want to know the impact, right? If we can know from national data that 1.8 million volunteers are active and creating over $4 billion of economic impact or economic value, we want to know what that looks like, right, on the local level. We also wanted to see what opportunities are there, right, that we're not yet maximizing on. We want to know that when we think about volunteer engagement, that we're thinking both on all ends of the spectrum, right? That we're thinking about leveraging and catalyzing existing volunteers to further and deepen their engagement. We want to also make sure that we have a keen eye to folks that aren't yet involved, right? And thinking about how we're sharing that invitation to get engaged. And then also thinking about building this as a stronger movement. Some of our other work has looked at how we can have a common voice for volunteerism and share resources to help cultivate that common narrative, but really wanting to see how are we building awareness, right? Just that when folks think about something that needs to get done, that volunteerism is a solution that comes to mind. And then finally, we see this as an opportunity to track our progress over time. So looking at our outcomes as a state and really thinking about there's a lot of opportunity here to see that as we do the VCEI, every 2 years is our plan, that we can really start to see some change in how folks are either engaging, the impact of their engagement, the needs across the state, that we're able to start kind of sewing some of those things together so that we can help tell that larger story. And it's not, one organization telling their story in a silo, right? That we can kind of help share that larger narrative so that service as a solution isn't something that folks have to think about, right? Or that is a new concept. So we're really looking to get this kind of widely distributed across the state. So getting into a little bit about what we learned. I'm going to talk about what we learned kind of broadly. I think that there's a lot of interesting takeaways. I will say I'll save some of our volunteer management specific takeaways for another time, just because I know that we're here to talk about a time to serve. And I'll kind of tease you with some information that I have information at the end to talk about how this fits into a business landscape, right? When we think about volunteerism and service and, corporate, small business, local business, that we found some really interesting takeaways from that as well. So first off, what we learned, we asked folks about what they cared about, right? We thought that it was really important to ground the current state of engagement in better understanding how volunteers themselves are really thinking about this work. I'll also make my slides available. I know that it's kind of hard to read. There's some small text, but when we looked at what folks cared about, we looked at it both on a statewide level, so asking them what their top 3 priorities for Virginia as a whole, and then also looking at their priorities for their local community. We phrased it as where they live. We found from the 6,300 folks that took the survey, a lot of their perspectives and their takeaways really align well with what we see kind of across the state. The housing, health and well-being, education rose to the top. We see that in a lot of different metrics and data sets. But what we found really interesting was when we compared local priorities to the statewide priorities, we found that there was a higher local value or local emphasis on some areas like public safety, economic security, environment. Some of these issues that we are kind of surmising that folks feel a little bit more tied to when it's something that's affecting their household, right, their neighbors. And then when we look at statewide priorities, civil and human rights and democracy, kind of things that I think folks maybe conceptualize as more of a statewide decision-making, that those start to rise to the top a little bit more when folks are thinking about the Commonwealth as a whole. We also have this data broken down regionally, right? And so when we look at both the priority area, we asked folks to share with us within that priority area, how do they start ranking some of these solutions? And then we break down all of the data by regions, by a lot of different demographic factors. So here as an example, I have education broken out. So for all the folks that ranked education as one of their top 3 priorities, they also had the opportunity to say, within education, these are the things I care most about. And we found some really interesting insights. I'll share more about how to access this data at the end. But for Northern Virginia specifically, there was a higher emphasis on access and affordability of college and higher education than in other parts of the state. Again, that's not to say that other parts of the state don't care about accessing or affording higher education, but it is kind of interesting that we start to see different local solutions kind of arise based on the region of the state that they fall in. So within those priority areas, we also wanted to start to get a sense of if folks were actually doing something, right? Of like, it's great to know what folks care about. We want to know if what they care about is connected to how they engage in their communities. For each of those priority areas, we asked what they thought would be the most successful way to intervene or way to engage. And we found that there was a lot of emphasis on community education and outreach, and then political action, policy change, and lawmaking. That overall, for everything except for disaster and crisis response, those were the top 2 kind of ways that folks thought that there was potential for engagement to make a difference. What was interesting was when we started actually looking at how many folks identify their investment in their communities in that same language versus kind of looking at volunteerism and philanthropy, not as mutually exclusive of these 2 options, but that we found a lot of folks consider them as vehicles to those larger outcomes. So I'll save my rant about kind of how we issue the invitation to volunteerism, thinking about this in mind, right? Thinking about how we're structuring our invitation to really get at this overarching goal, because we see that people want to make a long-lasting, sustainable difference in their communities. And so I say all this to say, it's interesting to see how we can start connecting what folks are doing in their communities with sort of where they see the most potential for change. And so we asked them a little bit more about it. They said, when we got a good sense of what they cared about, we wanted to know how that relates to what they report doing, kind of the current state of engagement in their communities. A lot of folks identify as volunteers, which is great news for all of us that do this kind of work day in, day out. Unaided, 59% of our survey population said, yes, I volunteered in the past year. We found that an interesting finding where there was another 20% of folks that said no initially, that when we asked them again to consider things like volunteering at their kids' school or showing up at a PTA meeting or helping out with a soccer league, that folks actually, when encouraged to think about it, found that they did actually volunteer, that they were more civically engaged than they initially thought. And we found some interesting findings around who kind of readily identifies themselves as a formal volunteer versus where we see these ripples of engagement outside of kind of the formal volunteer infrastructure or formal volunteer definition. We also found that formal volunteers are showing up, right? There's a large narrative, and I think a very true reality, that it is harder than ever in some ways to find volunteers, right? We've all probably had that that campaign that it is, I just need 5 more people. It can feel like the volunteers have gone. But we found that a lot of folks are consistently volunteering in various ways throughout their communities, so that they are kind of consistent in their activity, that they are showing up, and that they are maintaining their levels of engagement. For us, we kind of surmise that during the pandemic, folks probably found lots of ways to volunteer. And so whether volunteering is quite as localized as it has been in the past, I think is an interesting area for further study. But what we find really kind of tangible about this is that folks are investing their time, right? And so when we think about, can service be a solution here? We see that the answer is yes, right? That there are people that care about this and that want to get involved and want to be kind of at the forefront of this conversation. And we also see that there is a really strong, active network of folks that are active in their lives, right? When we think about, how many of us know our neighbors and how many folks are, kind of actively a part of a strong family system, right? Whether that's chosen or biological, watching kids for one another, or, picking up groceries, dropping things off. We find that 7 in 10 Virginians, at least of this engaged Virginian population that we saw it through the survey, are actively kind of engaged with folks in their lives and thinking about how this plays out around, talking about issues that they care about and sharing information. We find that this is really interesting and start to feed back to when folks talk about strategies like community education and outreach, that this is, these personal relationships are one way that folks are doing that. And then we also asked about civic action. We were encouraged to see how many folks report voting. And again, this is an engaged population that is probably more likely to vote than others. But we also found that aside from voting, there wasn't a ton of really high engagement strategies that folks were using in their own lives to think about civic, what it looks like to be civically engaged. And so even though most folks said political action is one of the top 2 strategies for making change in my community, this wasn't necessarily where they were investing most of their time, talent, or treasure. There are a lot of folks that report donating to civic causes, that they are, actively showing up for civic activities, but that this is maybe secondary in their framework of how they personally engage in the community. And a lot of that came down to trust. This, in coordination with other tools like the Edelman Trust Barometer, really shows us that folks are more likely to trust the places that they can show up and engage with. So when we looked at where folks volunteer, a lot of times there was, what folks care about. They're obviously or I shouldn't say obviously, we were pleased to see that folks are volunteering in the areas that they care about. But what was really interesting is we could take that one step further, right? Folks were also trusting those places. The places that they were able to show up and engage with often had a higher level of trust from folks that were willing to say, yeah, I trust them to do the right thing. And these trust, this data around trust matches up with what we can see nationally in a way that is really interesting to start thinking about, how do we get folks more engaged, or how do we, partner across lines of difference to increase trust in different spaces, whether it's in our own organizations or companies, or in other kind of strategies that we see on the community level, really wanting to make sure that there's a strong foundation for the work that we do, so that folks can trust that when folks are asking for participation in a civic activity, whether it's advocacy or education, that there is kind of a strong partnership there, and that folks know that what they do is going to be a valued part of the solution. And then finally, to kind of wrap it all around, we're here talking about a time to serve, right? And so we're talking about how companies and corporations can kind of get involved in this conversation, whether we're coming at that as an employer or as an employee. We found some really interesting findings when we asked folks, in the VCEI, we said, we'd love to learn more about your perceptions, maybe, of where you think employers should be active, and then kind of your perspective on where you see the greatest amount of performance. And so when we asked folks kind of that initial question of where do you think it's important for employers to play a role in civic engagement and community engagement, we heard a lot of things, right? And I know probably personally as an employee, I would say, yes, I expect a lot of my employer, right? To show up and to be active in the areas that I care about. When we asked folks about where their kind of level of expectation was, it probably not surprisingly didn't match up to where they felt like there was performance. And I think what's really interesting is, as we've talked about this data with employers and with employers of all different sizes, there's been a lot of interesting conversations about employee awareness, how many folks know about engagement opportunities, there being a lot of expectation with then, it being hard to meet those expectations in ways that like fully fulfill somebody's perspective on what that expectation means. And so I think that there's a lot more here, but I just offer this as a way to say, this is an area where folks are saying they want to see employers show up. And so we find that it's a really interesting way for employers to open up some of those avenues of communication, to say, making sure that there's full company awareness of the opportunities that are available, making sure that folks know about matching opportunities or mini grants that are made to the community, and really helping to build those partnerships with nonprofits so that we can see some of that shared trust capital, right? That as employers are partnering with the community, that employees can see that, and that can have a variety of impacts, right? Everything from maybe encouraging employees to volunteer and to get involved potentially for the first time, all the way through to just making a tangible impact against community needs that maybe are aligned with the employer's work. I'm also happy to get into this as much as folks are curious. I know that the next question always usually is, well, what can I do, right? Or what's out there? We did ask folks to kind of tell us their perspective, right, on what they felt like was most important to them and where they felt like their employers were showing up the most. I will just generally say that I think folks most prioritized solutions that kind of made that direct tangible impact. So the hours that employees can take off in a service leave, or the matching community donations, different things like that, because it felt very tangible and something that they could measure. There were definitely other solutions that folks kind of came up with, right, that talk about kind of more broadly engaging with community needs and efforts, and some things that folks are already doing really well, right? And so thinking about things about communicating with employees around what the companies are doing, or thinking about establishing those pathways to really build really sustainable relationships with nonprofits, that folks felt like their employers were actually doing really well on some of these things in addition. So I'm not here to say that there's all these things we need to be doing more of, just to kind of invite folks into this conversation that there are a lot of things that are going really well. And I'm excited to hear more of the local spotlights about what some entities and institutions are doing in the Arlington area. And then also, I think there's lots of opportunities where if you identify an opportunity to grow in any of these areas, just knowing that we have a lot of data around what might make the biggest difference. So I'll kind of skip over some of these in specific, but really just wanted to issue the invitation. We have a lot of data. It's always a little bit of a hard challenge to skim it down, but just really wanted to invite anybody that's been interested in this information to reach out to me. I'll put my contact information in the chat, and I'll make it available with these slides, to really just kind of invite the VCEI data into the conversation around decision making, right? And how we can use it to help us make evidence-informed decisions around programs, policies, ways that we can help support the community in that civic fabric. And then again, this can have impact everything from maybe a conversation with your kid's Girl Scout troop, all the way through to maybe a new employee engagement program to foster higher engagement of employees. So we're here to kind of help have those conversations of what that can all look like. And yeah, I will put my contact information in the chat. I know I went a little bit over, so apologies, but very appreciative of everyone's time, and looking forward to engaging soon more about the Virginia Community Engagement Index and how we can bring it to your community. So I'll pass it back to Lisa.
Annalise, thank you so much for coming and sharing this information, for your time, for the research. This is wonderful research. We're going to make sure that everybody has access to it. We've been doing some social media posts around it, but we'll make sure that in our thank you email, you have access to it as well. So stay tuned. And if you've got any questions during our networking time, Annalise, you'll be here at the end of the program in case anybody wants to connect directly with you. Is that right?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, that sounds great. Thanks so much for your time today. I know how much we appreciate all you're doing. Some great facts and figures. And wow, when you think about $4 billion of economic impact, that's huge. And we know that's probably not even telling the whole story, right? That's what's reported. But we know there's so many other things that are happening that aren't part of that number. So those are, it's interesting intel. Thanks so much for your work with this.
Yeah.
At this point, we are excited to introduce you to our panelists for this next portion of our program. We're excited to have Mark Schwartz, who is the County Manager for Arlington County, Karen Rosales, who's the President and CEO of Arlington Community Federal Credit Union, and Jamari Green, who is the Greater Washington Social Impact Activation Lead at Deloitte. Thank you all so much for joining us. They'll be joining the panel in just a second. Takes us a little bit of time to get them up here, so stay tuned for just one moment. Hey, Mark. There's Mark.
Hello.
Here comes Karen, and Jamari will be joining us as well. First of all, just a big thank you to you all for the example of your leadership and making sure you set this as a priority in your individual organizations. When we were thinking about this day, there are tons of examples here in Arlington that are doing this so well. But we thought about the government and how the county has really made a significant point of saying we're going to offer PTO for you to go find your own passion and to have service and to follow your lead of what you want to do in service. And so, Mark, you and your leadership has set the tone for many of us with that. Karen, your work at the credit union, you're doing the same, and Deloitte as well. And so we are so appreciative of y'all's leadership and holding that value up. And so that's where I thought we would just start right now. Why do you choose that as an organizational value? And why is having an employee engagement plan at all something that's important to your leadership and to your organization? Mark, why don't we start with you, then we'll go to Karen and Jamari.
So thank you very much, and appreciate the opportunity to be on the panel with my colleagues, and enjoyed that presentation we just heard. Two things come to mind when I talk about the value that I see from my perspective about allowing our professional staff to go ahead and serve in the community. First one is I actually want them to take a break from what they're doing in their job, and sort of step back from it and try to, do something a little bit different. A lot of the people who work for the county are in service to the community. So I don't need to convince them to be, that serving the community makes sense, but I do need to convince them to take a little bit of a breather and step back and try to do something different. So that's the first thing. The second thing is and again, I think it's just great for them to get the experience to work with some of these outside groups. So I guess I'm being selfish. It's like for their well-being and for the future well-being of my organization. So, and I guess it has the added benefit, I'm being sarcastic, of actually helping people. So
that's awesome. Thanks, Mark. Karen, how about there? Credit union.
Well, thank you also for having me, and I appreciate being on this panel with these wonderful people. I always get more from being on these panels than I feel like I offer, so thank you. So at a macro level, obviously, it's good for our community, right? It's civic engagement. It creates, Annalise touched on this, it creates understanding, engagement and activism, which leads to action and progress in our community. So on a macro level, I just think it's a very good thing. Specific to our organization, like Mark, I'm glad you used the word wellness. For us, this is an employee benefit as much as it is a community benefit, right? So, when you give a present, it feels good to be the giver as well as the receiver, right? And I find that when our employees go out into the community and volunteer and get involved, it has a give back to them as well as individuals. But I think for our organization in particular, community is part of our DNA. It's in our name, obviously. But our mission statement uses the exact words, create positive change in the community that we love. So it's really very much about connecting our employees to our mission to help make this community a better place. It reinforces our culture. Our culture is the foundation of our mission, right? So we hire a certain type of employee that has a spirit of service. So just having this kind of employee benefit and employee wellness program does, reinforce our culture. And then lastly, I like Mark, think it's good for people to get away, broaden their perspectives, get away from their daily job. We also allow people, and we'll get into this in a second, to volunteer in their own communities in a self-directed way that's important to them. So, it can be very meaningful. It's hard to find balance in today's world between, work and give back. So I'll stop there so that Jabari can jump in.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Karen. And echoing the thanks that both Mark and Karen did share, Lisa, to you and the entire Volunteer Arlington team for just allowing me an opportunity to kind of serve in this capacity on behalf of Deloitte. And really, I would say to just kind of echo both what my colleagues shared. At Deloitte, I would say that one of the things that we think about is, I would say, overall purpose. And we understand that community engagement and volunteerism is just one part of that overall strategy. And, as we think about that, we understand that as we lead with an integrated purpose, it's just a good business practice. We understand that having a purpose strategy allows us to have that competitive advantage. And, by doing that, we know that companies that really do lead with purpose have demonstrated that it can really show communities and other organizations how they can really thrive by having a strategy in place that allows their professionals to show up in the community and really allow them to engage in things that they're passionate about. And that's one of the things that we really do value at the firm is allowing our people to engage and participate in opportunities that allow them to truly align with their passion. So it's not just about, what is good for society, but then also what's good for our people. And we also understand that this is a business imperative, not just for us, but for many companies, because we know that society has an expectation of organizations to give back. Businesses are really being called upon to think about how can they leverage their own capabilities to benefit society outside of just their day-to-day client engagement. We also believe that purpose is really one of the leading market drivers of things like our ecosystems that we're currently involved in, because we understand that many stakeholders do play a role in our community. So it's not just about, again, our companies that we're working with, but then also more so about our employees. And our employees now, kind of tying it into what both Karen and Mark just shared, our employees really look to us to do good in the community, but then also ensuring that they can be in roles that really align with the things that they value. Gen Z and millennials these days are very passionate about things like climate change and the impacts that these things are having on our environment. And as the culture has it as well, we're also very passionate about initiatives like diversity and inclusion. And so as much as we can, put our best foot forward and play a role in some of those conversations and allowing our people to really show up in a way that's meaningful to them, is really why we at Deloitte think that that's important.
Thank you, Jamari. And that's a great segue for our next question. Annalise touched on this and you touched on it, Jamari, when you talked about overall purpose. But there's so many different ways that you could have an employee giving back program. And Annalise talked about whether it's a whole day of service and you're looking to take 200 employees somewhere, which sometimes works, is sometimes hard for the nonprofits, in full disclosure. Whether it's a matching program, because donations hugely matter. We learned in the midst of COVID that some of the best ways to serve was for individuals and groups and businesses to channel money into our safety net nonprofits so that they could continue the good work they're doing. But with all the array of different ways that people can engage, why choose time to serve? Why choose paid time off as one of the things that you'd like to focus on? And I'm going to dovetail the other question of what are some of the success stories in the midst of that? So feel free to chime in, anybody that wants to start with that. But why choose time to serve? And what are some of those success stories that you've seen from that particular campaign? Who'd like to get us started with that one?
I'll start, and then that way I'll set a low baseline so everybody can improve over it. We have, and I know this is not unique to us in Arlington County, but on MLK Day, we had, I don't even have the full count. We had a couple of hundred people sign up as a day on to give back to our community. And, I think that was something that when people heard about it, it sort of fostered another sense of sort of community within our organization. So people wanted to do that. That was a big event. And as you said, sometimes there's and I think perhaps Volunteer Arlington deserves all the credit for it, not us. But there was a lot of work that went into it. But we have found that people like to, as a bonding experience in a small work group, twosies and threesies get together and go out to AFAC, which is our food assistance center, and do things that for organizations that they like. But also separately, we had one of our employee resource groups do something that I thought was really neat. They went out and adopted a street in the county. Our outstanding group, which is our LGBTQ plus group, adopted 23rd Street South, and they're going out there on a quarterly basis to clean it up, make sure it looks nice. So those are just a couple examples.
I love that. Thanks, Mark.
So I'll jump in after Mark. I believe that if we want our employees to, we're in a service business, and if we want our employees to care for others, we have to care for them. And this is one way that we do that. I think it has a positive benefit. Jamari spoke to this as well. It has a positive benefit on our staff when they are out there volunteering in places that are meaningful to them. So our policy, we give people we have a couple tiers to our policy, but we give people 8 hours of PTO, and it's self-directed. They can volunteer at any nonprofit, 501c3 religious institution of their choosing. And, that makes people feel like they are fulfilled and have a, it can strike a work-life balance. A lot of our employees don't live in Arlington. They can't afford to. They have long commutes. So allowing them to volunteer in their own communities is helpful. I think the second reason why we offer time to serve is, as a service-driven organization, we have to have a culture of service. And so having a time to serve program, whether you're directly volunteering or not, we talk about our service and we spotlight the service examples, and that just reinforces this spirit of we are a service organization, we give back, we are in service to others. So it just really reinforces, what we do. And then lastly, I just think it helps staff stay engaged and connected to our mission. We're a smaller organization. We have 100 employees. Jamari has like 14,000 in Arlington alone, something like that. We're a small organization. And so it's really important that we're all rowing in the same boat at the same time. And when we do our annual engagement surveys, we consistently score in the 90% or above that people are connected to our mission. They feel like their work is important to the mission. They understand how their work relates to the mission. Well, the mission is about serving and making positive change in our community. So it all just kind of works together.
Thanks, Karen.
Jamari?
Beautiful. I mean, how do I top either of those responses, Lisa? I feel like there's not much more I can add, but from a Deloitte perspective, our mission is to really think about how we create an impact that matters in our society by using trust and equity to ensure that, society, we can create confidence in a more trustworthy and a more equitable society. And, the question that you kind of raised was around our policy for volunteering. But I like to say it's more of a strategy. We really embed purpose throughout all that we do. And volunteerism, again, is kind of just one of those pieces of that strategy that we deploy. Ultimately, we view the contributions of our professionals as the most important driver of change that can happen in our communities. And we do that really by helping them, again, find their personal purpose, both at work through volunteerism, but then even outside of the walls of Deloitte. And we understand, again, that we have that responsibility to create an impact in our society. And so as we think about really our strategy and offering time off, we understand that as our people show up in the community, they're doing things that allow them to find joy, that allow them to feel motivated and really connected to the communities that we live and work in. Oftentimes our clients kind of ask about the impacts that we're making, and to be able to go into a client project and tell the client that, hey, I did this service project, not just because of Deloitte, but because it's something I'm passionate about, and Deloitte supported that, it really goes over well with our clients as well. In terms of these specific success stories, in my role, I have the pleasure of managing a portfolio of about 45 nonprofits that are really in place to ensure our people have a way to engage and volunteer year round. And so it's not just a day of service, it's not just a program for a portion of the year, but we really do think about, can our people engage in community activism on a year-round basis? Within that portfolio, many of our employees, they volunteer alongside youth in the community. They may help with nonprofit strategies and business needs. And so thinking about that, some of my personal favorite success stories have been where we've leveraged our Deloitte Academy programming to expose well over within a year 1,000 students to careers within accounting in the professional services industry. We've also done things like offering SAT tutoring and prep services to students in the community to really help them feel more confident with standardized testing. I, for one, when I was in high school, I did not feel confident with, taking the SAT and ACT. So I could just imagine how beneficial that would have been to have a service like that when I was that age. And then the last, success story I'll share is just thinking about our approach to also professional skills-based volunteerism. We've done a lot in the community to help small entrepreneurs through various programs, either start their business and even sometimes occasionally scale it as well. So those are just a few of the things that make me really proud to kind of support Deloitte in our social impact efforts.
I love that. And that skills-based volunteering can have such an amazing impact. And that's hard to do with a big group, but when you find your passion, you really can start to make that impact in such a unique way. Just as a quick baseline, when we get calls, and we have our amazing team here, when we get calls from the community, whether it's individuals or companies, we always start with the question of, what's your passion? What do you care about? And that's going to be different for different people, which is why I think this campaign makes sense. Because if you just have a group project, it's great and it's good for team building, but it might not be everybody's passion. But if you start with that question of what's your passion, and then you figure out a way to implement that. The other key point I'd love to hold up from the nonprofit volunteer Arlington angle is that your passion might be jewelry making. You might be an accountant, but you might love jewelry making. Chances are that opportunity is not on the Volunteer Arlington site. Don't stop there. Find an organization that has a cause that you care about, whether it's public safety and justice or hunger, and then give them a call. Don't stop just with what's posted, because part of bringing your imagination to this and opening the door, you never know what can happen. And we've heard some amazing success stories simply by asking the first question, what's your passion? And then not stopping there when you didn't find it on a website, but to make that call to see if an organization might be open to that skill or that passion. I think it's important not just to share success stories, but also to show the flip side and the shadow side of this, because businesses who are looking to implement this kind of plan need to go in well informed. So what are those challenges with a policy like this? We know that there are challenges, and it might be harder for some bigger companies or with certain skills that are needed, or you need people there nonstop. What are those challenges, and any advice to those that are looking at implementing this program in their organization? Who'd like to get us started on that one?
I can start on that one. So we, as a smaller organization and again, we're like a retail business, right? We're here to serve our members. Creating space to take time away from work can be a challenge, right? I think coming out of the pandemic, we've all been experiencing staffing challenges for a few years. And so sometimes just having the capacity to let people go and serve is a challenge. I think another challenge is just ensuring that everyone, our leaders, our managers, that we all embrace this as part of our culture, so that we are actively trying to make time for our staff, right? It can't be an afterthought. If we really believe this is part of our culture and part of our DNA and good for our community, we need everybody to embrace it as such. And I think at times that balance of, well, there's the work and then there's volunteerism, that can be a challenge. And it's just something you have to constantly, caretake and prune. I feel like it has a bigger impact on a smaller organization, but I'm curious, from Jamari's perspective, what challenges exist at a really large organization?
Yeah. And honestly, Karen, I think that the challenges are very similar. I think primarily the biggest thing for us is, one, because we have such a large market that we are serving, is to ensure that all of our professionals are aware of the amazing opportunities that we even have to offer. Also understanding the environment that we're in, our professionals do understand the importance of their client work. And sometimes in our busy seasons, for example, around, the tax season, because they are so busy with client work, that could limit the time that they have remaining to really donate to nonprofits that, they would maybe want to volunteer with. I think another challenge too is that, to the point that you even just made, Karen, some nonprofits are still struggling to accommodate large volunteering groups in this post-pandemic environment. And so sometimes, therefore, coordinating meaningful volunteerism for large corporate groups can be challenging, because we're trying to now balance the needs of hundreds of individuals that are really passionate and want to get involved in the community. But the nonprofit sometimes cannot just accommodate the mere size of the and scale of the engagements that we're hoping to move forward with. So yeah, I think that those are some challenges, and I'll pass it over to Mark to maybe share his.
Thank you very, very much, Jamari. I think that one of the challenges we face, which I don't know if it's going to be true of Karen and Jamari, is, our employees are paid by the taxpayers of Arlington County. So we got into this question about, people came to us and said, I want to volunteer, but do I have to do it in Arlington County? Because a lot of our employees don't live in Arlington County. So we had to struggle with that one a little bit. Right now, our policy is that you can take 16 hours, which is 2 full days out of your year. And what we decided after a while, because we weren't really getting some of the uptake that we wanted, is we split the difference and we said you can do one of those days out of the county and one of the days in the county. But having said that, I'm not sure that we have quite figured out how to balance that, because for a lot of people, especially our workforce now, works differently than it did before the pandemic. We have a lot of people who are working remotely, and the idea that they have to come in to the office to volunteer in this community, even though we know Arlington is the greatest community in the universe, is a challenge. So that's something that I think that we're just going to have to continue to work with until we get like a national policy on volunteerism and sharing time across jurisdictions. That's just something we'll have to work through.
Thanks for all that.
Good. We struggled with that as well. And our policy originally started with volunteerism in Arlington. And then, when we went to a hybrid model, and so employees, again, they don't all live in Arlington. I struggled with that personally. And our community impact manager at the time really had to work with me to get me to broaden my perspective a little bit and talk about how this is all the things we've said earlier, that it benefits employees, it's work-life balance, it's reinforcing this spirit of service. So I personally struggle with that and got over it. And so our policy is a little broader than just Arlington at the moment.
And if I could, sorry, maybe just to add one other, I guess, piece of advice that we've kind of implemented as a leading practice with our volunteerism approach, we encourage virtual volunteerism. So there are plenty of opportunities to do things like virtual tutoring, mentoring to students, transcriptions of like archives that may need to be transcribed. There's a host of things that we do virtually that have really worked well. And, we've just seen our employees continue to engage in that way when they can't show up in person.
Great.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Awesome tip. We've only got a few minutes remaining before we let people have a chance to connect with you all and with our nonprofits in the space. But one last question. If you had any one piece of advice for an organization that was thinking about implementing this pledge, and we hope they will, and they'll take the pledge at volunteerarlington.org. But if you had one piece of advice, what would that one piece of advice be?
I can start. So for me, it would be to start small and build from there. Very small initiatives can have very large impacts. And as much as you can, really find ways to support your employees in identifying opportunities that align with the things that they are passionate about. Listen to them, take in their feedback. And ultimately, by doing so, we can then support both our communities, but then also supporting our people and making them feel more valued as well.
Thanks,
that was exactly how I was going to say it, to start. Start small and get feedback from your employees, survey them. I think the third piece that I would add is encourage people to tell their stories when they come back home, when they're back in the workspace. We've had some really powerful moments, organic moments at ACFCU when people have been out in the field, delivering financial education, teaching basic budgeting classes, things like that. And they're coming back and they're overwhelmed with emotion at times at the impact that their volunteerism has had on others. And that just I just actually kind of got goosebumps thinking about the last time this happened in a leadership meeting. It was a very impactful story. And that just encourages others to want to be part of that and to, want to make that kind of impact. Annalise said it in her opening statement. I wrote it down, people want to make a lasting impact in their community. So encourage people to tell their stories, because that fosters the program.
Absolutely. Thanks,
I'm just going to echo what you've already heard. The only other slight piece of advice I would have is that I know people can be a little bit scared is the wrong word, but it can be trepidatious about sort of going out there and doing it. Find a buddy to do it with. That's starting small, but find a buddy, and it can be fun. It's like a little bit of an adventure. I know that sounds a little bit sort of silly, but I think for a lot of people, it's overcoming that barrier. But just start small, get a buddy, try to have some fun.
I love it. Mark, thank you for that. Karen, Jamari, appreciate your leadership in this field and taking the time to come and share some of the things you've learned from putting these things into action. As we move forward, I want to encourage people to take the pledge if you haven't done so. It's at volunteerarlington.org. And back to what Karen said of sharing the stories, we're going to be following up with you. Our community engagement manager, Celeste McKenzie, wants to hear from you. So if you've got any of those stories with a picture and a testimonial of things that worked well, we want to blast it. We want to celebrate it. We want to put it out there for people to be able to listen to, learn from, and to celebrate, and hopefully create a ripple effect of the joys and the goodness that can come from this kind of thing. So please stay in touch with us. And if you haven't taken the pledge, do so. If you are not receiving our newsletter, we encourage you to sign up for the Volunteer Arlington newsletter so that you can know all the great things that are happening. But thank you all for taking the time to come out today, to our panelists, to Annalise, to all of you for coming. I know there were a couple of questions, but we're going to have some time for you to be able to connect directly with people in the room. So we encourage you to do that. We'll stay open until 11 o'clock or a little bit afterwards if people are still connecting and want it. But thanks again to our team, to our staff who is putting service into action on a regular basis. I'm grateful for you, and to all of you for joining us today. Enjoy connecting. There's going to be a slide up with the nonprofits who are in the room, so feel free to connect with them as well as with our speakers, and enjoy networking with one another. Thanks everybody for coming.